Pearl Harbor was supposed to be untouchable, a fortress guarded by the world's most advanced underwater sensors and the nerve center of US power in the Pacific. But during the Cold War, a Soviet submarine managed to slip through the cracks and surface closer to Hawaii than US commanders thought possible. The strategic sanctuary was suddenly vulnerable, sparking panic in American command centers and exposing silent gaps in the defenses meant to prevent another devastating surprise. How did the Watchnet fail so completely, and what did Moscow hope to prove with a move this bold? The answers reveal just how close the Cold War came to disaster. Pearl Harbor, perched on the southern edge of Oahu, was more than a naval base. It was the heart of US command in the Pacific. For decades after World War II, American planners treated these waters as a sanctuary, a place where the Pacific Fleet could regroup and project power without fear of sudden attack. The US Pacific Command, known by the letters CYN-CPAC, managed not only the defense of Hawaii, but also the flow of ships and submarines, supporting conflicts from Korea to Vietnam. Every carrier group, ballistic missile submarine, and supply convoy relied on the security promised by these deep blue approaches. The Pacific Ocean, vast and unpredictable, was the first line of defense. CIN-CPAC's reach stretched from the Aleutians to the South China Sea, controlling routes critical to both American and Allied strategy. At the center of this network, Pearl Harbor was more than a symbol. It was the main hub for logistics, intelligence, and nuclear deterrence. The base supported submarine squadrons carrying Polaris missiles, surface fleets ready for rapid deployment, and a constant stream of aircraft and personnel. Every movement was tracked, every arrival logged, all under the watchful eye of American command. In the Cold War, the stakes were measured not just in ships, but in the balance of terror. Pearl Harbor's role as a sanctuary was a linchpin in the US strategy of deterrence. If a Soviet submarine could reach these waters undetected, the promise of safety, the very idea that the United States could retaliate from its Pacific stronghold, would be thrown into question. The Pacific Command's confidence rested on a web of underwater sensors, patrol aircraft, and surface ships, all designed to spot any threat long before it reached Hawaii's shores. Yet beneath the calm surface, the Pacific was a contested space. Soviet naval doctrine under Admiral Gorshkov called for aggressive patrols and reconnaissance, pushing the limits of how far their submarines could reach. Each Soviet patrol tested the boundaries of US detection, searching for gaps in the web. For the Americans, every untracked contact or unexplained sonar blip was a reminder that the ocean's vastness could work both ways. The idea that a hostile submarine might slip through even once was enough to keep commanders awake at night. Pearl Harbor's vulnerability was not just a local concern. The entire chain of command, from the watch officers at CIN-CPAC headquarters to the Pentagon, understood what was at risk. A successful intrusion would shake the foundation of US deterrence, raising doubts among allies and adversaries alike. For those tasked with defending the Pacific, the possibility of surprise was more than a lesson from history. It was a daily living threat, lurking somewhere beyond the horizon. Across the Pacific, the US Navy relied on a latticework of technology and human vigilance to guard the approaches to Hawaii. At the core was SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, a network of hydrophones stretched across the ocean floor, listening for the telltale hum of submarine propellers. Data from these underwater microphones streamed into shore-based naval facilities, where analysts scanned endless lines of acoustic traces for any sign of a Soviet boat. In theory, this web could catch a submarine hundreds of miles from Oahu. In practice, the ocean itself fought back. Hawaii's underwater landscape is a maze of steep volcanic slopes, deep trenches, and scattered seamounts. These features bend and scatter sound, creating acoustic shadow zones where a submarine could slip by, masked from even the most sensitive sensors. During the summer, strong thermoclines, layers of warm water over cold, further refracted sound waves and shrank the effective range of each SOSUS array. Hydrophone lines aimed north and northwest, but the Pacific's vastness and shifting currents meant there was always a sector just out of reach. Operators at the naval facilities in Hawaii watched their screens knowing that somewhere in those blind spots, a Soviet captain could be listening, waiting, moving undetected. The word to remember here is shadow. Technical limitations were not the only challenge. Maintenance was a constant battle. Undersea cables stretched for hundreds of miles, exposed to storms, shifting sediments, and the relentless pressure of the deep. Scheduled outages for repairs or equipment upgrades left sections of the network temporarily deaf. Even a single array offline for a day could open a corridor wide enough for a submarine to pass through unnoticed. Records from the era show that maintenance windows, though carefully planned, were unavoidable. Operators learned to live with the uncertainty, trusting that patrol aircraft and surface ships could fill any gaps. The reality of constant maintenance shaped every routine. Air patrols faced their own constraints. P-3 Orion aircraft were the mainstay of U.S. maritime surveillance, but they were in high demand across the Pacific. During periods of crisis or heavy operations in Vietnam, aircraft were reassigned, leaving fewer planes to sweep the approaches to Hawaii. Sonobuoy drops and radar sweeps could only cover so much water, and each mission depended on weather, crew availability, and shifting priorities. On some days, a patch of ocean the size of California might go unpatrolled. The pressure on resources created a sense of strain and demand. For the sailors and analysts standing watch at naval facilities, the reality was sobering. Every blip on the screen had to be scrutinized. Was it a merchant ship, a whale, or something more dangerous? The acoustic signature libraries for Soviet submarines were incomplete, and Soviet crews continually refined their tactics, running at low speed or hugging the seabed to blend with background noise. A submarine moving slowly beneath a thermocline could vanish into the static, invisible to the net meant to catch it. The duty required relentless scrutiny. These vulnerabilities were not theoretical. Declassified studies and operator accounts describe missed contacts, ambiguous returns, and moments when a sector went quiet at just the wrong time. The Pacific's sheer size, the quirks of undersea geography, and the limits of human attention all conspired to create holes in the defensive net. For every confident detection, there was a lingering doubt. What had they missed? In the cold mathematics of undersea warfare, even a single blind spot could be an open invitation. The historical record left no room for complacency. For planners and commanders, the lesson was clear. Technology was powerful, but it was not perfect. Geography, weather, maintenance, and competing missions all combined to produce gaps in the watch net. In the tension of the Cold War, those gaps were not abstract problems. They were opportunities, and sometimes they were exploited. The consequence for strategy was stark. Close the gaps, improve detection, and never assume the ocean is secure. Remember the word invitation. Project 641, known in the West as the Foxtrot-Class, was the workhorse of the Soviet diesel-electric submarine fleet through the 1960s. At first glance, these boats seemed outmatched by the US Navy nuclear-powered giants, but their physical endurance and acoustic profile made them a persistent threat in the Pacific. On the surface, a Foxtrot could travel more than 20,000 nautical miles at moderate speed, enough to cross the Pacific and return without refueling. But the real challenge and the advantage lay beneath the waves. Submerged, a Foxtrot's world shrank to the size of its batteries. At a slow crawl of 3 or 4 knots, it could remain underwater for up to 48 hours before needing to surface or snorkel and recharge. Every hour submerged was a calculation: conserve power and stay hidden, or risk detection by running the engines. The ocean itself became an ally. By dropping speed and hugging the deep sound channel, a Foxtrot could blend into the background noise of the Pacific. The key was shaft revolutions per minute. Low revolutions per minute meant less vibration, less propeller cavitation, and a fainter acoustic signature. Experienced Soviet crews learned to run at the lowest possible speed, shutting down non-essential machinery, even limiting conversation to whispers when close to enemy sensors. The hull design, with its rounded bow and triple screw arrangement, produced a distinct but subdued sound profile at low speeds, harder for US analysts to separate from merchant traffic or biological noise on acoustic plots. This was stealth in practice. Surface endurance was impressive, but the need to snorkel brought risk. When batteries ran low, the submarine had to raise a snorkel mast above the surface, drawing in air for the diesel engines. That act made the boat vulnerable to radar and visual detection, especially near heavily patrolled areas. Soviet doctrine called for snorkeling at night or during rough weather, using the cover of storms or high seas to mask the boat's presence. In the open Pacific, with its unpredictable weather and vast distances, even a few hours on the surface could pass unnoticed unless a patrol aircraft happened to be overhead, or an SOSUS array picked up the telltale rhythm of diesel starting up. The Foxtrot's operational range and acoustic discipline gave Soviet commanders the confidence to send them deep into the Pacific, probing the limits of US detection. Patrol logs from the era show boats spending weeks in transit, alternating between silent running and brief calculated surface intervals. These boats were not fast, and they were not invulnerable, but in the right hands, a Foxtrot could vanish into the Pacific, navigating by dead reckoning and celestial fixes, slipping through gaps in the American net. For US anti-submarine warfare experts, the challenge was clear. Every hour a Foxtrot remained undetected was an hour when the Pacific sanctuary could not be guaranteed. The balance between endurance, stealth, and the ever-present need for air defined the cat-and-mouse game that played out beneath the waves, far from the headlines, but always close to the heart of Cold War strategy. Inside a Foxtrot-class submarine, life ran on the edge of endurance and discipline. Every crew member understood that survival at sea depended as much on silence as on steel. The boat's quieting protocols shaped daily routines, engines throttled to their lowest settings, non-essential machinery powered down, and even the galley kept to cold meals during critical stretches. Crewmen spoke in low voices, careful not to let a dropped wrench or a slammed hatch betray their position to distant hydrophones. In the control room, the captain and his watch officers tracked battery draw and air quality with the same attention as the boat's depth and heading. When submerged, the Foxtrot's world was measured in hours, not days. Battery endurance forced a strict schedule. At a crawl of 3 knots, the crew could stretch underwater time to almost 2 full days, but every extra knot burned precious reserves. The need to recharge was a constant presence. At the edge of exhaustion, the order would come: prepare to snorkel. The transition was tense. The snorkel mast, raised just above the waves, drew in air for the diesel engines, but also risked detection. Radar operators ashore or in the sky could catch the briefest glimpse of a mast or periscope. On these nights, the bridge was manned by the most trusted hands, scanning for aircraft or patrol ships, ready to crash dive at the first sign of trouble. Navigation in open ocean demanded a mix of old and new. The crew relied on dead reckoning for as long as possible, plotting their course by speed, heading, and time. But even the best estimates drifted over days. To fix their position, the navigator would risk a quick periscope check at night, hunting for a star or a distant lighthouse. Each exposure was a gamble. Surface too long, and a radar sweep might paint the periscope, alerting US forces. The Pacific's unpredictable weather could be an ally or an enemy, Heavy seas masked the boat's presence, but made navigation treacherous. Calm nights offered clear stars, but left the snorkel and periscope exposed against a smooth horizon. Every hour submerged brought new challenges. Carbon dioxide built up, making the air thick and stifling. The crew rotated through short watches, conserving energy and oxygen. In the machinery spaces, engineers monitored the batteries for signs of overheating or voltage drop. Any failure could force an emergency surfacing, a scenario every submariner dreaded. The captain kept a mental ledger of risk. Push the batteries too far, and the boat might be stranded, surface too soon, and the mission could end in disaster. These routines were not just about stealth, they were about survival. The interplay between human discipline and mechanical limits shaped every move. Soviet crews trained for months to master the art of silent running, learning to trust their shipmates and their own endurance. In the vastness of the Pacific, far from home and hunted by unseen adversaries, every detail mattered. The quiet routines, the strict protocols, the calculated risks, all were part of the invisible chess game playing out beneath the waves, where one mistake could mean detection, or worse, never returning home. A Foxtrot-Class submarine, painted in drab grey and bearing the red star of the Soviet Pacific Fleet, slipped away from the Kamchatka Peninsula under heavy clouds. The boat's orders were clear: cross the open Pacific, stay silent, and avoid detection at all costs. The route had been plotted weeks in advance, skirting the Kuril Islands and then bending southeast, away from the busy shipping lanes toward Japan and the US West Coast. Soviet navigators relied on merchant convoys for cover, sometimes using the background noise of cargo ships to mask their low-frequency hum. The challenge was not just distance, but invisibility. From the moment the submarine cleared the last Russian headland, the watch officer kept a careful eye on the chart table. Every hour brought a new calculation: battery reserves, oxygen levels, distance to the next scheduled snorkeling interval. The captain had drilled his crew in the art of silent running: no unnecessary movement, no raised voices, and no metal-on-metal sounds. At 3 knots, the Foxtrot barely left a trace on the ocean's surface. The hull cut through the deep blue, riding beneath the thermocline whenever possible, using shifting layers of warm and cold water to scatter the telltale echoes of sonar. The watch on the bridge moved like a single organism, small noises magnified, every creak and whisper noted. The Pacific offered both shelter and threat. On some nights, heavy weather swept down from the Aleutians, tossing the submarine in rolling swells. The crew welcomed the storms, because high seas meant fewer patrol aircraft and more acoustic cover. At dawn, the watch officer would raise the periscope for a quick scan, a horizon empty of ships and a sky streaked with grey. Each surfacing to snorkel was a risk, but the vastness of the ocean worked in their favour. With luck and discipline, the boat could recharge her batteries under the shadow of a passing squall, the diesel exhaust lost in the wind. Navigation relied on dead reckoning and the rare opportunity for a celestial fix. The Pacific's sheer size forced the crew to trust their instruments and instincts. The captain's log recorded the slow eastward progress. Day after day, the boat moved farther from Soviet waters, deeper into the American sphere. The crew marked their advance by the changing soundscape: fewer Soviet trawlers, more distant thumps of merchant propellers, and the occasional faint ping of a distant sonar. Every hour brought them closer to the approaches of Hawaii, where the ocean's emptiness would give way to the unseen lattice of American surveillance. But for now, the Foxtrot remained a ghost in the open sea, threading through the spaces between patrols and sensors, one careful mile at a time. Darkness pressed against the hull as the Foxtrot-class submarine eased onto the shallow shelf north of Oahu. The captain ordered all engines stopped. With a gentle hiss, the ballast tanks adjusted, lowering the boat until her keel rested on the seabed, silent, invisible, and motionless. The Pacific's volcanic floor here offered a rare patch of level ground, just deep enough to keep the hull hidden from surface sonar. but close enough to monitor the distant pulse of harbor traffic. Every movement was calculated. The watch officer, eyes fixed on the dimly glowing dials, listened for the faintest sign of danger, a distant propeller, a sonar ping, or the mechanical whir of an approaching patrol craft. Bottoming was a high-risk maneuver, reserved for moments when stealth outweighed mobility. Here, the submarine's batteries could be conserved and the crew could rest in shifts. But the risk was real. Any sudden change in current or a misjudged depth could trap the boat. The Pacific shelf near Oahu was a patchwork of sand, lava flows, and coral ridges. Soviet navigators had studied charts and hydrographic surveys, searching for a spot where the submarine could blend with the seabed's acoustic clutter. Once settled, the crew powered down all but essential systems. In the control room, the air grew heavy and still. Engineers monitored battery draw, keeping the electrical load to a minimum. Even a stray pump or a humming fan could betray their position to distant hydrophones. The captain permitted only brief periscope exposures, just enough to check bearings against the faint outline of the island or the scattered lights of distant ships. At night, the periscope lens caught the glow of Honolulu on the horizon, a reminder of how close they had come. Each fix was a gamble, too long above the surface, and the risk of radar detection soared. But without a visual reference, dead reckoning could drift, and a single navigational error might bring the boat dangerously close to a reef or a patrol zone. For hours, the submarine lay still, a shadow on the ocean floor. The crew moved quietly, voices low, every sound muffled by layers of steel and silt. Above them, the ocean teemed with life, schools of fish, the distant rumble of merchant ships, the steady beat of the Pacific surf against the island's southern shore. The watch officer counted the minutes, waiting for the signal to rise. In the silence, the tension was a living thing. One wrong move would shatter the illusion of safety. But for now, the Foxtrot-class remained undetected, poised just beyond the reach of America's defenses, ready for the next move. A flash message tore through the teletype circuit at Pearl Harbor's operations center. It announced that an unidentified submarine had surfaced within sight of Oahu's northern approaches. The first report came from a harbor radar picket, its scope lighting up with a blip where none had been expected. Within minutes, the duty officer at Commander Submarine Force, U.S. Pacific Fleet, was roused from routine paperwork by a shrill phone call. The message was blunt, visual confirmation, unknown hull, bearing north-northwest, less than 12 miles from the channel entrance. No prior contact, no warning from the sound surveillance system or the air patrol logs. The operations watch snapped to high alert. Inside the command center, officers scrambled for answers. The teletype clattered as updates poured in from the harbor entrance and coastal radar. Staffers traced back the last 12 hours of sensor logs, searching for any acoustic anomaly or radar track that might explain how a submarine had closed the distance undetected. Nothing fit. The phones rang in a staccato chorus. Navy intelligence, air operations, base security. The watch officer's voice cut through the din, demanding confirmation. Was the contact friend or foe? The answer came back negative. No US or Allied submarine was scheduled in the sector. A heated debate broke out over the rules of engagement. Some argued for an immediate show of force. A destroyer dispatched at flank speed, P-3 Orion scrambled from Barber's Point, signal charges ready to drive the intruder down. Others warned against escalation, urging caution until the submarine's intentions could be established. The situation was made worse by the lack of a clear protocol for a foreign submarine surfacing so close to the base. Every officer in the room understood the implications. If a Soviet boat could appear here, the entire defensive posture of the Pacific Fleet was in question. For nearly an hour, the command center became a pressure cooker. Flash traffic raced up the chain to Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Headquarters, and across to Washington, D.C. Intelligence officers pored over recent Soviet fleet movements, searching for any hint that a Foxtrot-class or Gulf-class submarine had been dispatched to the area. The duty officer paced between plotting boards and the secure phone, fielding demands for updates from every level of command. Each minute stretched the tension tighter. The knowledge that an adversary's submarine had surfaced untracked, unchallenged, and in sight of Pearl Harbor hung in the air like a challenge. For the men on watch, it was a moment that would not be forgotten, a breach in the shield they had trusted for decades. Soviet naval planners in Moscow viewed the Pacific not as a barrier, but as a proving ground. Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, architect of the modern Soviet Navy, pressed for operations that would test the reach of United States defenses. His internal memoranda, circulated through the Soviet operations desk, laid out a doctrine that called for forward patrols, deliberate incursions, and intelligence collection in contested waters. The Pacific Fleet's orders reflected this mindset: push the limits, gather data, and learn where the American net was weakest. Doctrine excerpts from the Gorshkov era reveal a logic centered on reconnaissance and psychological effect. Soviet submarines were tasked with more than shadowing carrier groups or tracking missile submarines. They were instructed to probe the periphery of United States strongholds, including Hawaii. The reasoning was twofold. First, every successful approach, undetected, provided valuable acoustic intelligence on United States sensors and patrol routines. Second, the mere possibility of a Soviet boat operating close to Pearl Harbor would force American planners to question their assumptions, spreading uncertainty across the chain of command. Within Soviet headquarters, analysts debated the intent and risk of such missions. Three main hypotheses shaped their thinking. One, that close approaches could yield technical data on SOSUS and surface surveillance, mapping the seams in the American shield. Two, that a publicized surfacing, whether deliberate or forced, could serve as a strategic message, a demonstration of reach intended for both Washington and Moscow. And three, that mechanical realities sometimes dictated tactics. Battery exhaustion, equipment failure, or navigational uncertainty might compel a submarine to surface or bottom near hostile shores, regardless of original orders. The pattern was not unique to Hawaii. Soviet submarines had tested NATO barriers in the Atlantic, sometimes surfacing within sight of Norwegian fjords or British coastal towns. Each episode was scrutinized by the Soviet operations desk, with lessons fed back into training and doctrine. Gorshkov's staff tracked American reactions, noting changes in patrol frequency, sensor upgrades, and public statements. The goal was to measure not just technical performance, but the psychological impact, a silent contest of nerve and credibility. In the absence of direct admissions from Soviet logs, these hypotheses remain grounded in declassified doctrine and the recollections of officers who served under Gorshkov. The evidence points to a calculated strategy: approach the enemy's sanctuaries, learn their habits, and when necessary, make your presence known. For the Soviet command, the value lay as much in the questions raised as in the answers found. Each undetected patrol, each unexplained surfacing, was a data point in the ongoing chess match beneath the waves. The aftermath of the submarine's approach rippled through the halls of the Pentagon and the offices of Pacific Fleet planners. In Washington, senior Navy officials reviewed the incident with a cold clarity, weighing the vulnerabilities that had been exposed. The question was not just how a Soviet boat had come so close, but what could be done to prevent it from happening again. For many, the answer lay in technology and procedure, an urgent drive to close the gaps in undersea surveillance. By the early 1970s, funding requests for anti-submarine warfare surged. The fiscal year 1971 budget included new allocations for research and deployment of mobile surveillance platforms. Among the most significant advances was the development of SOSUS, the Surveillance Towed Array Sensor System. Unlike the fixed hydrophone lines of SOSUS, SOSUS relied on long cable-like arrays towed behind specially equipped ships, listening for the faintest trace of a submarine's passage. These arrays could be repositioned to cover blind spots or reinforce sectors where fixed sensors struggled, giving commanders a flexible tool to track quieter, slower-moving targets like diesel-electric boats. Maintenance protocols for the existing sensor net were also overhauled. New directives required more frequent inspections of undersea cables and shore-based equipment, along with stricter reporting of outages or degraded performance. The goal was to minimize the windows when a sector might be left unguarded. No longer would routine upkeep be treated as an inconvenience. Every hour offline was now seen as a potential opportunity for an adversary. Diplomacy also played a role in the response. In 1972, the United States and the Soviet Union signed the Incidents at Sea Agreement, known as INC-C. The pact established formal rules for naval encounters, aiming to reduce the risk of accidental escalation from surprise meetings at sea. Although the agreement was shaped by years of tense interactions in the Atlantic and Mediterranean, the memory of unexpected submarine contacts in the Pacific, including those near Hawaii, weighed on negotiators. The message was clear. Both sides recognized the dangers of operating at the edge of detection, and both sought ways to manage the risks without surrendering strategic advantage. The legacy of these changes was visible in the years that followed. SOSUS ships became a familiar sight in the Pacific, trailing their arrays through waters once considered safe by geography alone. Maintenance logs grew more detailed, and sensor upgrades became routine rather than exceptional. The balance between secrecy and safety shifted as policymakers accepted that the ocean's vastness could no longer be trusted to shield the homeland. Each improvement in technology, each new protocol carried the imprint of lessons learned, some from documented incidents, others from the silent anxiety that a single missed contact could change the course of the Cold War. Today, the Pacific remains a stage for silent games as submarines from multiple nations still test boundaries with technology that outpaces old defenses. Even with modern sonar and satellites, no system is flawless. In 2023, the United States Navy reported more than 40 unidentified submerged contacts near its coasts. The ocean hides more than it reveals, and in these depths, uncertainty is the only constant. Think about your perspective. How much trust do you place in unseen lines of defense?